What's up, you guys? It's Zamora, and I am back with, you guessed it, a new video. So, this was just inspired to me a few moments ago, really, when I was chatting with a good buddy of mine who was sharing with me his story, misfortunate story, about how he didn't pass his driver's test, and it reminded me of a little less than 2 years ago, how I was in that boat of getting getting myself tested and all that road exam. And yeah, so let's start. First of all, I got my permit back in April 2013. And I remember I was tripping. I was so excited. I was eager. I was ready to start driving something. And at the time, I had my brand new car, or mom had her brand new car, which turned out to be a graduation gift for me at the end. And, it was the car of my choice, the 2013 Corolla. And I was like, wow, this makes me even more eager to want to learn things right and ask my questions and study that book and just be perfect and flawless and yada yada. So I kept my permit for a little over a year because there were a series of events that took place during 2013 that disabled me from diving into a license right on. First of all, I personally wanted to have lots of experience. I wanted at least 6 months. And maybe I'm a weirdo for saying that, but I just didn't want to feel like I had to be taking a test already just so that I can say, hey, I'm taking a test, I'm going to pass it so I can start driving, but mentally I didn't have the maturity of a driver. And what I mean by that is I didn't want to be caught up in the excitement of, ooh, I'm sitting in a car, I know how to operate it, and when someone is with me, everything is okay, and I just want to dive into, getting my license so I can start driving by myself and all that. And I was also 18 at the time. It's not like I was starting like everyone else who was starting at 16. Back when I was 16, I was looking at everybody starting to drive, and I was like, aren't y'all too young for that? For me, a vehicle is a huge responsibility, and I feel like I just needed to be much older to be able to really convince myself that, what it means to have and operate a car. And although I had the maturity back then, I just didn't also have the necessity to be driving like that. I was telling myself at the age of 16, where do I need to go? That's not school, And for me, I also thought about how anything could happen. Distractions can happen. Just anything can happen. And I felt like at that age, I was just particularly vulnerable to committing mistakes. And I said, you know what? I want to sit down with someone and just converse about what it means to drive a car. So during the following years, up until, around age 18, I would always ask mom just questions. I remember the time I asked her, Mom, when you're driving, what are you looking at? And she said, literally, I'm looking at everything. I'm looking to the mirrors. I'm looking at what's ahead of the road, what's immediately in front of me. Basically, I create awareness that's in a full circle. I know what's happening everywhere at any time. And I was like, wow, I know what you're saying, but I wonder how that feels. And then when I actually got to driving, I was overwhelmed because, first of all, I'm thinking about I need to keep the vehicle in motion safely, and I need to react to things that you don't count on. And when she said stuff about having awareness of her surroundings, I'm like, how can you possibly take your eyes off the road that's in front of you to monitor your mirrors and all that, you know? And then I said, you know what? I just need to create a situational awareness to, as to when the vehicle is in motion, keeping the notion that I am in motion. And what I mean by that is, if I'm traveling at 35 miles per hour, how does my panorama change in front of me? You know, like, how quickly can a car get in front of me at that speed, and how quickly can I respond to avoid something if it's going to happen? You know, and then after a while, it became a really natural thing to do. I consider myself a super safe driver presently, and it's because I asked the right questions and I made the proper observations when I was in my pre-permit era and then during my permit era, to where when exam day came about, all I did was I reviewed the book for the written part of the test. But other than that, I felt comfortable. Now, the only part that got me, that I suspected would get me, but I had hoped that I wouldn't encounter in the test, but given the person with a certain degree of curse that I am, is the 3-point turnabout. When I was reading it in the book, you know, when you read something, you create a picture in your mind. Well, I was having that issue to where I couldn't picture very well what the paragraph was saying. And then I said, you know what? This is just a tiny section on the book. There's no way this can affect me much. And really what was happening is I had a little bit of a language barrier. And I, for some reason, did not think of going on YouTube and looking up a 3-point turnabout. So on the day of the exam, first of all, I waited forever because, you know, DMV, where all of your hopes go to die. I know I've seen that in some kind of meme, but I forget what it is. Anyway, yeah, I kept getting more anxious and more anxious, and I kept rereading the book. And at some point I said, after the first 10 minutes, I said, I'm gonna stop reading this because I studied this for months. I know the content, but anxiety wants me to think that I need to review this to ensure that nothing really, you know, left my grasp. And, you know, I've been a good student. I knew that book, but for some reason I wanted to find something to worry about. So at any rate, and anyway, my moment to drive came, and of course I felt that chill throughout my body when my name was called and all that. So anyways, went to the bag, did the signing of papers and registering, whatever it was that I had to do, and then we stepped outside. And then I expected all kinds of crazy questions like, you know, sit down, and, you know, I also looked over at him to make sure that he had his seatbelt on because I felt, what if this is a test? And I also readjusted my mirrors, or pretended that I was adjusting my mirrors so that he would see that I'm, you know, a careful driver, meticulous and methodical and all that. And anyway, he also, prior to boarding, he was looking around at my car. He was like, all right, I want you to cut on the battery, but do not turn the car on. And I was like, Mom never went over this with me. But anyway, I figured that all I had to do was turn the key. And then, boom, my monitor came to life and all that. And then he was like, I need you to turn on the left blinker, the right blinker, etc. And I'm pretty sure he was looking for A, my ability to understand what he's saying, and B, check that my lights work, because somewhere in the book it said that your car just had to just be functioning properly. And anyway, and given that my car is newer, everything is so heavily electronics and computers that you need to turn on your battery to make sure that those other functions work. You know, like I realized that you need to open the door in order for you to not be be able to roll the windows up and down despite the car being off. I had to ask a good buddy of mine who's totally not a car dummy to explain that to me, because I was worried. I thought there was a flaw in my system. I'm like, this looks like it could interfere with security. But anyway, and then I drove and everything was fine, everything was okay. And at some point he was asking me a verbal question, or verbal questions. He was like, so at what's the speed limit? And that was kind of a tricky question because we were in a residential area, and then I was like 35, and he said, I doubt it. And I was like, I'm already messing up the question. Why? How? And then I was like 30, and he said, right, because remember, this is a residential area. And I'm like, I never see a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit sign. And not only that, it's like instinctively you know at what speed to drive. Look at my speedometer. I've been driving at 30 all this time. My instinct just tells me. I can just verbalize it to you. Besides, I'm semi-listening to you because I'm trying to drive this car. That's what I wanted to say, but that's not what I said. Another question he asked was, I want you to go into the street and perform a 3-point turnabout. And I was stuck because I honestly was like, what does that mean? And then he was like, did you even study it? And I'm like, yeah, but sincerely, this is the very part of the exam that I hoped I wasn't going to see, because I didn't understand what the book said. I truly didn't, just for this one. And then he was like, well, if you wanted to, in this very street, come from that direction, what would you do? And then I said, you want me to execute that right now? And then he was like, yeah. And I said, well, I would get as close to the right curb as possible. I would turn left, and as I was reaching like the maximum like reach that I had before I would strike the sidewalk, he said 1. And I was like, and then shifted gears, reverse, turned, to where backing up, my butt was now closer to the sidewalk, the opposite sidewalk from what I started. And then he was like 2. And once again, he was just counting, and that was making me nervous. But anyway, I kept rolling with it. But I felt like what I was doing was illegal because my mom regularly didn't do that. I would never be on the street and see someone performing a 3-point turnabout. I didn't think that was even legal. We would always find entrances to get into to just like go around the block to come back to the street in the direction that you intended to go. But at any rate, and then finally, when I rolled forward after backing up, he was like 3. Good job, you just did a 3-point turnabout. And I was like, oh, the book should just say that. It should just say, in the event that you find yourself wanting to change the flow of your traffic heading, you will want to perform a 3-point turnabout, which is a completely legal maneuver to perform. And it consists of you approaching the sidewalk that's on your opposite end, meaning your left side, etc. Different wording. If I find the book, I'll show it to you guys. The wording it didn't work for me, but maybe it was just, like I said, a language barrier on my part, and I just couldn't visualize what the paragraph was saying despite me understanding the words. But anyways, and yeah, after that I was just really nervous because I was like, man, I feel like my score is not really good right now, because even though I know how to drive, I'm driving well. This is a third person. He doesn't know me. He doesn't ride with me regularly to see how much of a cautious driver I am. And right now, all of that is irrelevant. So at any rate, we went back to the DMV, and he was like, that was the worst driving I've ever seen. My jaw dropped. I seriously thought he flunked me. And then mom was waiting for me outside, and she was like, so how did it go? And I was like, not good. He said I did terrible. And she was like, huh? What? Really? Seriously? What happened? La da la da la. And then it turns out that I go back to his desk or whatever, and he's like, all right, you're going to sign right here, and that'll be $8, $10, $15. I forget how much it was. And then I was like, oh, in cash? You know, I didn't even have a checkbook, because back then I didn't have a bank account. I had no money. And then, so mom and I went to the nearest bank or whatever, because he said, well, I can't take your picture and, you know, send your stuff unless I got your money. And I'm like, I understand that. I didn't have a heads up, you know, I wish I did. At any rate, so yeah, that was, right now as I tell the story, I feel like that nervousness again. But I also had another friend who, I think she flunked like twice or thrice before she got her license. And I'm like, you kids, how do you let that happen? What gets you about the exam? Is it the vehicle you're driving? Is it that nervousness just gets the best out of you? Or just what is it? Another DMV story is that on a different time, mom was getting her ID renewed, and there was some man there, completely unprofessional. She was taking her test, and then the examiner, clearly she did horrible, because he came back in and really aloud, he was telling the father, you know, she's absolutely not ready. She had, when she was trying to start the car, she left the ignition, you know, like la 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 la, and you know, she just couldn't even shift gears or anything. We didn't even leave the parking spot. So she's absolutely not prepared, and this and that. She needs more practice. And you know, the poor girl, first of all, she was embarrassed. She was scared. And his father just gave me the impression that he was very strict, because as they were in the waiting room, he had like this really rough tone, and you could tell that he was just very like authoritarian. So that poor girl, she probably flunked more out of stress more than not having the skill, because I have zero doubt that she had the skill. It's just that the way that the situation presented itself, and God knows what kind of examiner he was, everything just piled up for the girl, you know. So you guys out there, when you got your license, did you have any difficulties? Are you working to get your license? What made you nervous? What made you scared, etc.? I hope that my story helps you out, because for me, as a person who has lived with anxiety, around 2014-ish, that's when I got my license. I got my license exactly on September 11th, 2014. What a date. At any rate, it was tough, because I had episodes in which I had near collisions, and a couple of them, two of them, actually the only two, were my fault. And it was because for one of them, the ugliest one was on May 16, 2014, and it was, someone just confused me because they had their blinker on. I was trying to merge, and you know, they were approaching and they had their blinker on, and I'm thinking, okay, he's gonna turn right at my entrance, and you know, because he had it on from a distance away. But it turns out that he was going after the entrance that's like a few hundred yards away. So I was already starting to merge when he was approaching, because I'm like, I'm going to use that time he's going to take to turn to buy me some time to, you know. And it turns out he kept going. So of course he was blowing his horn and whatever, and what I did was I stepped on that accelerator and I just kept going as if the devil were after me. And then mom was really worried. She was like, well, what happened? Because she didn't see anything. And I said, well, he did something that really confused me. And you know, and yeah, it was really scary, because I saw that car like maybe that far away from me. when I, initiated my evasive maneuver. Another thing I did was I turned as close to the curb as I could, but without hitting it. And fortunately, he had the option of switching lanes. There wasn't anybody next to him. But, that was, to this day, that's still the scariest episode that I've had while on the road. And then another time was, for some reason, I just spaced out and the light was red, and then Mom told me, hey, the light is red. So then I slammed on my brakes, and that was the first time I ever heard my tire screech. And yeah, it was around the same year too, so pretty stressful. And then I was like, sorry, I don't know, I didn't see it, I spaced out. And fortunately there was no car coming, but I of course had to run that red light. And after those 2 episodes, I've never had an incident like that, to where I have near collisions like that, because I said, whenever I'm sitting on this seat, this is what I'm doing. I am driving the car. Any conversation that I'm having, I'm gonna let the person know, look, I'm sorry, I'm gonna need you to repeat that, or tell me the story at another time, because right now I'm a little busy. And anybody who rides with me regularly, they know when I'm really focused, and when not to engage me in a conversation, because I'll tell them, hey, you see how heavy traffic is? Give me a minute, because I really have to have all of my 4 eyes ready. And yeah, you guys, that is my story as to how I became a driver and my pre-driving or pre-licensed era. And yeah, you guys, for those of you who anxiety gets the best out of you, it gets better, I promise. Just examine yourself, ask yourself, what did I not do well on? And if it was everything, then you're probably hanging out with the wrong crowd, or you need to like find someone who's willing to invest time with you, who's a good driver themselves. Because for me, it helped to have my mom, because she has an impeccable record. She's been driving for, I think, 40 years now. Lady has never had any incident, no stain on her record, and I intend to keep it that way myself. So yeah, that was my story of how I became a licensed driver despite all of the odds of me never being a driver. And alright, you guys, that's it, and peace out.